Good afternoon, guys. My name's Acting POPT O'Brien, and I've collaborated with civilian ERI Amy Day to present you an overview on resistance training in relation to rehabilitation, also to equip you with the knowledge and confidence to self-manage your individual programs. We're both experienced and qualified ERIs at degree level, and both are currently studying at postgraduate level in rehab. Why is resistance training important? Okay, it's essential for resistance training to be implemented into your individual program, and it will make up the bulk of your program while you're on course. Resistance or load stresses the structural components of the body, in particular muscle and bone. Recovery must be applied straight after the stress, okay? And then this will result in an adaptation, i.e. the muscle and bone become stronger over time. Muscular strength and size declines naturally with aging and becomes dysfunctional through sedentary behaviour, prolonged exposure in certain postural positions, or injury. Resistance training improves our musculoskeletal health and optimises and restores our functional ability. So we rely on our muscles to support regular daily activities at home or in our job role, such as lifting, pushing, pulling, squatting or lunging. Okay, if we neglect resistance training, it may lead to muscle weakness or muscle imbalance and potential injury. So if you are unaccustomed to a particular load or stress, i.e. lifting weights, sprinting, or even a role-specific movement such as casualty evacuation, then it is very unlikely that the body will not cope with that load and you'll be increasing your risks of injury. Qualities of resistance training. So the four main qualities of resistance training: strength, power, hypertrophy and endurance. The focus of any resistance training plan should be tailored to meet our desired outcomes and specificity. For example, with a rehabilitation program, our resistance training could be designed to reduce asymmetry in limb strength followed by injury, or to improve your specific job role performance. Okay, we might use resistance training to support an increase in sprint speed. Okay, so focusing on these different attributes, strength, power, hypertrophy and endurance, will meet our desired goal outcomes. Okay, and as you'll learn further on in this presentation, it's best practice to cycle these attributes or these qualities, okay, in different blocks. Okay, resistance training for strength. Strength training is the ability to exert force. The heavier you can lift, the stronger you are. But it's also important to realise high forces results in low speeds. Therefore, it's not best practice to constantly train in strength ranges, as it may affect your speed and power. Okay. Quick strength gains are related to increased neuromuscular facilitation, and this basically means that the central nervous system adapts first. The nervous system responds to a training stimulus, a load. The nervous system recognises the stress and becomes efficient over a period of time, typically 2 to 4 weeks. These neural adaptations improve activation and the recruitment of muscles. Okay, to continue these improvements, there needs to be a gradual progression and a variation to your training program. You also need to facilitate the program with active recovery. Okay, and we'll discuss how we'll facilitate all this into a training program to maximize your strength gains. Training for strength should be carried out at 90 to 100% of your 1 repetition maximum. Now that percentage can change and vary depending on what text you read, okay, but we've just extracted this from one particular text. But you can still gain strength at working 85% of your 1RM, okay, but 90 to 100 is the most optimal. With it being so in high intensity and such a stress on the central nervous system, rest in between the sets are very important whilst training for strength. Okay, typically between 3 and 5 minutes will be required. Resistance training for power. So power is the muscle's rate of work it's able to produce. An example would be if you're required to move a relatively heavy object at speed, and it'd be good for you to start thinking of where you may do this in your specific job role. An increase in power occurs relatively soon after commencing power-specific training. As with strength training, this is due to the improvements and adaptations in the neuromuscular facilitation, as explained in the previous slide. Typically, when training for power, you should be aiming between 40 and 60%, one repetition maximum. Again, it will depend which text you read. There are many types of exercises we can focus on in power. Okay, and plyometrics being one of them. It's important to realise, particularly in plyometric exercise, to generate efficient power, eccentric muscle action must occur first, followed by the concentric action. So eccentric, the lengthening of the muscle, and the concentric is the shortening of a muscle. Okay, and this would be the same as an elastic band. If I was to stretch an elastic band, it would lengthen, and if I let go, it would shorten and concentrically create power. Okay, and this is often referred to as elastic power. Within rehabilitation, power exercises are generally introduced at the later stages of rehab due to its skill and intensity. Resistance training for hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is carried out to increase muscle size. Okay, while strength gains are seen relatively quick, muscle growth takes longer to occur. Okay, so the adaptations are coming away from the central nervous system now and going into the actual motor units that live within the muscle. Okay, so they just take that little bit longer to adapt. But in contrast to that, the more responsive the central nervous system is to strength training, the quicker you'll see increases to hypertrophy at the local level of the muscle. Okay, eccentric training generates additional muscle damage. So remember what I said about eccentric training is when the muscle's lengthening. Okay, and this is going to elicit greater muscle growth upon regeneration. When performing each set of exercises for optimal results, the repetition should be sufficient to work you until a point of failure. Okay, ranges occur between 70 to 90% of your one repetition maximum. Again, for all the other rep ranges, you can still gain hypertrophy from working 60 to 65% of your one rep max, okay, but these ranges are the optimal percentage. So resistance training for endurance. Endurance training is important to ensure we have sufficient muscular endurance to sustain or perform repeated muscle contraction. Okay, so again, think of a specific job role where your muscles are required to continually contract throughout a long period of time. Okay, so that could be running, it could be yomping, it could be doing a stall ship, it could be sport specific, maybe cycling, it may be swimming. Okay, so your core muscles, your stabilizing muscles need to be activated continually. Okay, and if they don't, then other muscles are gonna take over. Okay, so to increase our endurance, we need to exercise with low resistance and higher volume. Okay, so volume, i.e. reps and sets. Okay, optimal ranges, okay, is usually 1 to 2 sets, 15 to 30 repetitions at around 50% of your 1 repetition maximum. Again, some techs may increase this higher to 70%, okay, but I would argue that amateur trainees, okay, would be more down the lower end to 50% of their 1RM, while intermediate professional athletes would be potentially training around 70% of their 1RM. So this is just a table of all the loading parameters, reps, sets, and rest intervals, percentage of 1 rep max for each attribute. So it's just been put into a table for you to have for a reference. We reference this table from Bruckner and Kahn if anyone's interested. But like I said, there's different loading parameters out there for different techs. So this is the force velocity curve. It's a good visual to see and use in your training programs. Essentially, you would aim to surf this curve. Okay, so you wouldn't be just working at max strength, or you wouldn't just be working at max speed. You would be working at all the attributes in between those two. Like I said before, if you constantly train maximum strength, you're teaching the body to move slow all the time. Okay, so it will adapt to that. And in contrast to that, if you're always working speed and body weight exercises or below 30% of your 1 repetition maximum, you're never going to gain, okay, optimal strength or power. Just quickly summarise on what we've learned so far. So resistance training has many benefits and should be a fundamental element of any training program, okay, as well as CV, which we'll go into in a second. Individual training plans can be tailored to focus upon different resistance training qualities, okay, and specificity to your job role to protect you from further injury. To facilitate optimal results and recovery, training programs must be structured to support this. Okay, so active recovery in between your training blocks is key, and also varied movements. And we're also going to go into that into part 2 of this presentation. Training, programming and prescription. So in the second half of this presentation is going to be based on how to structure all the elements you used in the first half, such as all the qualities of training, such as hypertrophy, strength, power, their intensities and their time in rest. How can we now implement that into a program where it's got structure and periodization, i.e. active recovery? So principles of training. Each of these elements that I'm going to go through in this slide must be implemented into your program for it to be an effective training program. So periodization encompasses everything I'm going to discuss in this slide. But essentially what it means is it's to break down your training to facilitate periods of recovery. Overload. Overload must be applied to a program. It is the progression in loading of the structures, bones, muscles over time. If we apply the same load over a prolonged period of time, the body will start to accommodate and become accustomed to the stress and will no longer adapt. In contrast to that, underload can reverse strength, muscle size and cardiovascular fitness. Active recovery. This simply means not complete rest. Complete rest may be warranted with certain injuries, but if you've not been prescribed with complete rest, then don't do it. Okay, active recovery is particularly important after your training block, i.e. 4 to 6 weeks, and it will generally last for 1 week. Specificity. So applying specific exercises into your program is required to achieve your desired goal. Similarly, your exercises want to mimic movements you perform in your job role, thus protecting you from further injury. Variety is essential. It reduces monotonous training, which may cause boredom. It also reduces the body's accommodation process, avoiding plateaus in your strength training. Individuality. Okay, it's really important. The program must suit your needs, your beliefs, and your goals. It must contain exercises you enjoy. More importantly, be relative to your capacity and strength, i.e. a percentage of your 1 rep max. Your daily monitoring questionnaire you do every morning, okay, this will sometimes dictate what effort you can put in your training. Okay, if you've had a lack of sleep, or you're feeling stress, or feeling you've got muscle soreness, okay, you're not going to be performing your best on that training day, and it's really important to make that relationship. So how to periodise your training. Okay, I've done a very basic periodisation program here in a graph format because it's an easy visual. So in block 1 consists of 4 training weeks. In those training weeks, I'm going to stick to the same intensity every week at 65% of my 1 repetition max for the majority of the exercises, followed by an active recovery week on the red bar. And then after that, we'll go on to block 2, where I've increased the intensity to 5%. Okay, the intensity is increased, so the volume, my reps and sets, would have decreased. So I've got some variation in that program. And then thereafter, you repeat the process. So I go on to an active recovery week again, I go on to block 3, and then I can increase the percentage to 5 again if I wish. So this is very linear in nature, and it's very good for amateur trainers. Okay, those that have not got a great deal of experience in resistance training, they're going to adapt to the resistance training very quickly for this method. It's important to make block goals during your training. So block 1, for an example, would be to increase muscular endurance or cardiovascular training. And then block 2, it can be the same goal, or you can change it. Now, maybe you want to go for more hypertrophy. Okay, so your block goal is very important. It keeps you on track on your training. Okay, and we need to make goals so we've got purpose for our training. So this is another way you can design your program. So again, I'm using the block system. In this approach, it's more of a step approach week by week. So in block 1, I'm going to start at 65% of my 1 rep max and then increase it by 5% every week until I get to my active recovery week. Thereafter, block 2, again, I'm going to start on 65% of my 1 repetition maximum, 70%, and then I go into 80 and 85%. So I'm probably working more on a bit more hypertrophy strength on that block 2. So that potentially would be my block goal, hypertrophy strength. This is still linear in nature, but it's a good progression from the first example I used. It creates more variety, okay, so you're not going to get bored as much. Also, the body is not going to become accommodated to the stresses, okay, and you can progress more quickly. So this kind of type of training would be probably beneficial for the intermediate trainer. So this last example of a periodized program it's a non-linear approach. based on loads of changes in volume and intensity, and it's in a non-progressive manner, so the body doesn't get accustomed to a linear loading pattern, whether that be a step week by week or month by month. Eventually, after time, the body is going to become adapted to that sort of training. Like I said, very good for a beginner, intermediate trainer, very good. But once you've done 2 years post of a professional strength and conditioning program, okay, and you're noticing plateaus in your training, then this type of method, an undulating, okay, non-linear approach, would be very beneficial. And as you can see in block 1, we've got 30%, we've got 10% in there. These are variables that have not been discussed yet, and they wasn't in the loading parameters table previously discussed. But there's nothing wrong with adding those in. Okay, yeah, we're primarily working on the velocity side of things, or power, and essentially we're surfing that force velocity curve week by week. We've got some body weight movements in there, so this is essentially plyometric exercise. Before going into block 2, of course, we've got our active recovery week. Again, that's going to consist of low level jogging, walks, reduced intensity on resistance training, and then going into our block 2, where we're kind of maintaining some strength and predominantly muscle size in there, but also plyometrics. On a whole, though, looking at both blocks put together, we're predominantly down that, working on velocity, down that sort of end of the curve, maintaining a bit of strength in there, which is absolutely fine. You're going to maintain strength if you work in those strength rep ranges for once a week. Absolutely fine. So an example program for you. This was something I designed for when I was a strength and conditioning coach for various court-based athletes in the Navy. You can see the program's very linear in its approach, predominantly working on muscular endurance for the first 2 weeks, and then progressing to probably more hypertrophy type training, for the next 2 weeks, and that was considered one block. This was early on in their training. Also had a lot of new athletes in there, and I wasn't too sure on what their training age was, so I played it safe. And so it's just a quick little example for you. I've got their relevant rest periods in there, depending on what their intensity is. So halfway through that season, the guys started plateauing, and I quickly realised this, had to make drastic changes. So I put in an undulating type program, just so I could try and maintain some strength, some cardiovascular fitness, some power, okay, but also maintain that, but for them not to get fatigued as well. And how I do that is by doing alternate days in their training. So you don't have to train every day. Okay, this is something I've not mentioned yet. It would be wise to alternate your training days, particularly if you've had a very stressful training day. A day on, day off approach would be very suitable. Some trainees will find that they take longer to recover. It can take anything from 24 to 72 hours, that recovery. If you're feeling muscle soreness and fatigue and low mood, then that's alarm bells ringing, saying that you should take some needed rest, and it may be up to 3 days you need until you go back into your strength training session. So don't forget your cardiovascular training. This is very important, and we all know it's essential for our job roles in the military. We need to pass our annual fitness test. Okay, we may be called upon to exert physical activity in a short period of time. Okay, so you need to have that resilience and respiratory fitness to deal with those stresses. Okay, other benefits are it reduces many chronic diseases significantly. Okay, increases energy. Okay, and supports a healthy body weight. Okay, and also improves the sleep and just the general mental well-being of a service personnel. Okay, going into the London bus study, so I just want to highlight the importance of physical activity and movement in general. So the researchers studied a large population of 31,000 travel workers, and on average the conductors walked most of the time, okay, and would sit for minimal periods. They also climbed an average of 750 steps per day. Okay, and comparing that to the drivers who were highly sedentary and were sat for 90% of their shift. Okay, the study concluded that the active workers, okay, those conductors, significantly reduced their risk to chronic heart conditions. So it's really important that we're still educating people on how important movement is and how it is for a natural medicine. Even after 7 decades of knowing this information, I feel we still lose sight of it. So what type of CV is best for you? So we've got interval-based training. This can either be short or long. With basically interval training is bouts of activity followed by short periods of rest, and you do that over a period of time. Long interval training, you can work anything up to 40 minutes plus. Short interval training would be predominantly 20 to 30 minutes maybe, but obviously it's shorter in time, but it's higher in intensity. Okay, so the higher intensity stuff we all know is HIIT training. It's very beneficial for the service personnel. Maybe you're short of time due to your job role or family life, and if you do a 20-minute HIIT session, you're going to get really good adaptations from that training. In contrast to long endurance training, where you still get similar health benefits from both HIIT training and endurance, but with the HIIT training, it leads to far greater fitness levels in a shorter period of time. So that's really key to know, particularly for our sort of lifestyle. So, but and also in contrast to that, if you're someone that enjoys long endurance training and you've got the time to do it, then that's your lifestyle and that's your belief. So that's absolutely fine to do that. It needs to suit your lifestyle and it needs to work for you. Okay, so that's basically the end of the presentation. It's quite short on the CV side of things, but we do go into a bit of theory during the practical elements on this course. Okay, just to summarise then, I want you guys to review the loading parameters, okay, and find out throughout the course what your capacity is, whether that's in a 1 rep max or a 5 rep max. Okay, start understanding what your body is capable of doing, and you'll get that through your daily monitoring as well. Okay, implement the training principles and the periodization we spoke about. And remember, the principle of variation is key in training, whether that's variation in intensity and volume or a change to exercise. Implement those rest days. Like I said, you can do day on, day off, okay, but it may take up to 3 days. If you're noticing fatigue and low mood levels during your daily monitoring over a long period of time, over 3 to 4 days, then you need to take some rest. So start listening to your body. Okay, and don't forget your CV. Okay, but we're going to speak more to that on the practical element. Okay, thank you for listening. I hope it was an informative presentation, and I look forward to discussing it with you in the education session.